this is a story about a sale that didn't work out, but I don't regret it. I'm Alexis, hacker, inventor, and entrepreneur. I build stuff, I modify stuff, and I sometimes even try to sell it. I met a friend I haven't met in a while, and he told me that he had become a CEO of a company and he needed a machine to fill bottles, and that his supplier was very slow reacting, basically let him down and couldn't fix issues with the machine. So at some situations it was not filling the bottle, it was overfilling the bottle, made a huge mess. And so he was unhappy. Of course, as an entrepreneur, I saw a potential sale, a potential problem to be solved. And as an engineer, I realized, yeah, it's not that tricky to do. I mean, it's a rather slow-moving machine. Nothing needs to be fully real-time. I was like, we could do that with the Raspberry Pi. And he sounded interested. He was like, yeah, Raspberry Pi sounds good, especially having a better user interface was a good argument to him, which is rather easily doable with the Raspberry Pi. I mean, either you use the direct video output of the Raspberry Pi or you make a web interface. All stuff I've done before. So that all sounded great. And then I was like, yeah, let's meet. I went there and I saw this huge machine. It was a machine like they were built in the old times, these round table machines. So they had a table of 2 meters diameter for little bottles like this. I mean, half-liter bottles. But table had a 2-meter diameter and the bottles were going around and having different stations at each position. Yeah, and basically it was the software going crazy and not properly working. All programmed in some PLC, no source code available, and a non-reactive supplier, as I said. And so I was like, yeah, I rebuild you a whole new control system for that, and then we will have it under control, and I will be able to support you and make updates if needed for how long you are running this machine. And it all looked interesting and sounded nice, and then I made a quote, and I also offered to come along between Christmas and New Year, because that's the time where I have holidays, vacation time, time to invest in such projects. And for him it was also great because, of course, his company was closed down back then. So I thought I have an amazing offer. I mean, it was a decent amount I asked for compared to other stuff I've done, but I'm pretty sure I was half or less than half the price of any competitor in the industrial automation space that would have tackled this problem. So I thought, yeah, it's an attractive offer. I sent it to him in silence. So yeah, then I just let him think, and then he was like, yeah, suddenly that supplier, that old supplier, started reacting again, and yeah, I want to listen what he is saying. No real movement, no real progress. I had set in my mind, like, I mean, everyone is a bit in a bubble, myself too. So in my bubble, I was like, yeah, it's gonna happen, it's going to happen, but I don't want it to fail because of some hardware components. So I knew he had a scale in his machine. I knew he had many 24-volt inputs and outputs. And so I started looking on AliExpress for what could be modules that I could use. One of them was RS485 module that is here on top. That's the RS485 on top of a Raspberry Pi. The thing in between here, let me take that off. That is just an I/O expansion board for the Raspberry Pi. I realized, I mean, okay, that thing costs $10 on AliExpress, or even maybe a bit more, but it just saves me so much struggle. I mean, I remember doing all the connections to the Raspberry Pi myself. I can show you many boards like this, but I was like, nah, I mean, if that saves me 1 hour of work, it's already worth it. I had RS485 port expanders for inputs and outputs, having two advantages for me: getting more IOs out of the Raspberry Pi, of course, because I have a bus. I can add nearly unlimited IOs on that, or at least a few hundreds if needed, and I didn't need a few hundreds. So RS485, that's the master on that goes on the Raspberry Pi. I had slave modules. I've got some slave modules too. And for the scales, I got this little chip. It's down here. You might see it. It's in here. And I put it here on an experimental setup just to be able to test that load cell. I also figure out, if I show him that I'm taking the initiative, that might help the progress of the project. But at some point he was like, no, we're not gonna do it this year. We have to figure out our whole production. So many open questions. So in the end he bailed out. But I mean, he didn't say he doesn't want to do it with me. So it might come to at a later point, that project. I don't know. But in the meantime, I was playing around with that load cell chip, the HX711. And the HX711 chip I had seen at many places here and there, especially around Arduinos and Raspberry Pis. And so I looked a bit into it, and I noticed, okay, there are lots of libraries around it to use it, because with load cells and scales, I had a pretty bad experience back when I was doing EveryCook, my cooking device. I was really, really struggling with all that noise you might get, because it's a very weak signal. And we had a chip that was rather expensive with no libraries, so we had to figure out in detail how to talk to that chip and so on. Very low level stuff. And so I was a bit traumatized by scales, but luckily, I mean, I think on AliExpress, you get the load cell together with the chip module for $5 or so. So it's a no-brainer. And actually that little HX711 chip has an amplifier built in and the ADC, so it has all you need, because you need to first amplify the load cell signal. The load cell signal is less than a millivolt at no load, and goes up to 1, maybe 2 millivolts per volt excitation. So it's a very, very weak signal. And nevertheless, I got the chip, I hooked it up, I tried it out. Actually, a fun thing, I was on the train. I had it on my train table and writing a nice Python class to do calibration and stuff and testing different libraries I had. So for the Raspberry Pi, I found a library, and the Raspberry Pi is probably, I don't know if that project is ever gonna come, but what do I have back here? This is the next project I'm doing, which is also related to that baby, which will come in a video very soon. Now I have 3D printed the whole assembly. You see the HX711 in here. You see a platform on top. And I mean, the load cell, you barely see it because it's totally embedded in it. And so again, it was a skill I could reuse. So again,
just do it!
Just do it. Or as Karl Lagerfeld said it, sometimes you need to throw out the money out of the window so it comes back through the door. I don't see myself as wasting money. I'm wearing old clothes. I invest much less in my appearance. But when it comes to hardware, the whole project for me was maybe $200 in hardware invested, which I have now on stock. I can, if I want port expansion for my Raspberry Pi, if I want to transmit data over a longer distance to do something over there, the RS485 port protocol is very well suited, very reliable and known. Now I just took the same HX711 chip for the load cell, hooked it up to an ESP32, And guess what? It works. Now I have it working with the ESP32 for my next project, and it was totally worth it. And especially what was also worth it is go through that client salesman interaction, like figuring out what does that person need. I mean, of course, he was a friend, so it was not a 100% cold approach. It was kind of a warm approach, but I was not I'm still not an established player in the market for industrial automation. So I understand there was some hesitance on his side. All this sales procedure is something you can only get good at if you exercise it. So it was an amazing exercise for that. I mean, it's like all the electronics and technical stuff, but if you are a technical person watching this and you are thinking about how could you ever make money on yourself, so that's not your boss taking a big chunk out of it, then you have to go through this sales process. And in the sales process, especially in online marketing, they're always talking about the conversion rate. So how many people you need to contact until you have one sale. And that conversion rate is never going to be 100. If you get to 10% conversion rate, you are already very happy, very lucky. And so go through the grind, try to sell something to someone, and then figure out how to do it. That's another story of how I didn't get where I wanted, but still I'm very happy I tried.